I'm happy to be here with you this morning. My name is Tyrone Howard. I am a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles. Before I went into the professorship, I taught in Compton schools for 9 years. So the work I do is with teachers, about teachers, in schools, with students, with parents, with school leaders, so I'm always honored to be in your presence. Where are the people who say that teachers aren't dedicated to their profession? Not here, right? Let me see by show of hands, how many folks are being paid to be here this morning? Look around the room. Not a single hand has gone up. So I want to say thank you for your commitment and your dedication to your work, because we know that a lot of people beat us up, right? Everything that ails society is because of teachers, right? Global warming is because of teachers, right? The economic crisis is because of teachers, right? Everything that seems to go wrong is because of teachers. So I know this sounds a little corny, but this is something I think that we should do, and I do this every time I talk to teachers. I want to ask you a small favor. I want to ask you to turn to the person to your left or to your right and tell that person, thank you for what you do. That's important to do because no one quite understands what we do as much as we do, and it's important for us to acknowledge each other in this work, okay? Another thing I do real quick, I always like to see the folks who have been dedicated to this for a long time and who are just starting. Let me see by show of hands, are there any folks who are here who are in their first year of teaching? Okay, give them a round of applause, folks. First year folks. All right. First year folks. You guys still look sane. You still have, when I started, I had hair, so you can see what this does, right? Let me see by show of hands how many folks who have at least 10 years or more in the field. All right, give those folks a round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, how about 20 years or more? Big round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you much. Okay, now we're about to get into the real special people, okay? How about 25 years or more? Wow. I'm going to ask the 25-year plus people. I hope you don't have, can you please stand up? 25 years more. Please stand up. We need to see you, okay? Wow. 25. Don't sit down. Give them a big round of applause. Thank you, thank you. I think we don't acknowledge our own enough. And if we don't acknowledge each other, no one else will. Because you do this work and you invest in other people's children in ways that oftentimes they may not oftentimes appreciate. So it's important for you to acknowledge your co-workers and what we do, because it is hard work. It's difficult work, it's demanding work, and oftentimes it's thankless work in the short run because people don't understand what we deal with and what we encounter every single day on behalf of other people's children. So I just want to say on behalf of all the countless numbers of families you've touched, on behalf of the countless numbers of students that you've touched, thank you for what you do. We know this work is not for the compensation monetarily. We know we do it because of what we believe can happen when we invest in young people, okay? And I'm just, what was it, 41 years, my goodness. And see, I came from a district in Compton. We used to count our years of teaching in dog years, right? So we used to say, with some of the things we encountered in Compton, you know, folks in other places could never begin to envision. So if you taught 10 years in Compton, we would call that like 70 years of teaching in the rest of the world, right? So for some of you, you probably would say where you teach is a similar kind of a concept, right? So for that 41 years, you got over 280 years of experience of teaching. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I've got a short time with you here today. And so I'm not here today to give you any magic bullets. You all are facing the issues that districts all over the country are facing. All kinds of issues around achievement gaps and students learning and students who aren't learning. So I'm not here to give you a magic bullet to say this is how you fix it. I'm not here to tell you it's just as simple as 1, 2, 3, because you know this is not that easy, right? I'm not here to give you a bunch of how-tos or give you a prescription as to what you can do when you go into your class Monday morning. What I do want to do is perhaps give you just some things to think about as you do this work. And much of what I say with you in this brief time this morning, you probably have thought about before. But given how far we still have got to go to get our students where they need to be, it's important for us to continue to reinforce some of these ideas, because as much as we have made progress in some areas, we still have large numbers of our students who are not getting what they need. And in many ways, it's getting significantly worse than what it has been in years past. And we have got to be very honest with ourselves about educators in terms of what we can do to help turn this around. Does that make sense to folks? So let me get started real quick with a couple things that I want to use to kind of start our conversation today. I make this statement all the time. Most students enter schools as question marks and exclamation points. Far too many leave as periods. Interpret that. We have students who come to our schools eager, excited, enthusiastic about learning, correct? Wanting to be in places called schools, but something happens along the way where that enthusiasm, the eagerness, and the excitement they have is done after a while, and they become periods. Periods conveys end of story, complete, over, done, finished, okay? So the question that we're oftentimes trying to come to grips with is how is it that students who come oftentimes excited leave very unexcited? And I'm not talking about students who leave this way after 9, 10, or 11 years of schooling. In some cases, as you all know, it happens after 3 years of schooling, or 4 years of schooling, 5 years of schooling. So part of what I want us to think about is why do we have students who come at one point looking forward to being in places called school, but then are no longer excited about being there? And I would contend that it's a combination of factors. And we can't control all of them, but what I do want us to think about are those factors that we can control within the context of schools that might have a role in that, okay? Now, I think so much of what we're going to talk about today is tied to these 3 words: values, attitudes, and beliefs. You know what? I could go through all kinds of strategies and suggestions and content and programs and approaches. Believe you me, I'm sure you've got tons of that over the years, and I do that with teachers all the time. But at the end of the day, all the strategies, all the skills, all the recommendations that I could give you are only as effective as what you believe about the children that you teach. It's only as effective as the attitudes you have about the work you do with young people, okay? It's only as effective as the values you bring to the classroom. And folks, I think we're amongst friends. I think we're amongst family. And I hope I don't step on toes. But I spend enough time in schools across this country to say that there are people who work in our schools who just fundamentally do not believe that certain kids can learn. And it's quite evident. I'll go one step further. There are people in Dallas Independent School District who just don't fundamentally believe that certain students can learn. I'll keep going. There are folks that you work with and you know who just don't fundamentally believe that certain students can learn, right? And that's the real crux of this problem. I mean, I can give you books, I can give you lessons, I can give you units, I can give you all these things. I can give you a lot of stuff. But that stuff doesn't matter if in your heart of hearts you really believe that the young people who walk into your classrooms, be they poor, be they black, be they brown, be they single-parent households, if you don't believe that those kids can be successful. See, I talk about this stuff because first and foremost, this is what I do. I spend time in classrooms, talking to teachers, watching teachers. And for you all who've been in classrooms long enough, all it takes is about 2 minutes to walk in a classroom and to know what a teacher thinks and believes about the students that he or she is teaching. It doesn't take long at all. So I do this because this is my profession, right? But it goes beyond that for me when I talk about this because it's personal for me. It's personal for me because when you talk about all the characteristics that are consistent with being so-called at risk, most of them fit me, okay? My mother was 18 years old when she had me. Single-parent household, Compton, California, crime, gangs, drug, poverty, all the things that we say means kids cannot learn, right? So when I see teachers giving up on young people, I make it personal because that makes me think of what my experience could have been like. Where I grew up, young men, black men, it was an accomplishment to reach 21 because many of my friends are no longer here, dead, in jail, all the kinds of things that happen in poor communities across this country. So when I talk about this, part of what I want folks to do is have a sense of urgency because you got young lives that hang in the balance. And unless you take on a different kind of urgency, you're not going to reach those kids. And you cannot hear, and if there's one thing you remember, before I get into the rest of this, one thing I hope that you keep in mind from my brief time with you here this morning, this should be your litmus test. Ask yourself the question at the end of the day, do I give to other people's children the same kind of time, effort, and energy that I expect to be given to my children? Because a lot of folks do not, and it's quite evident. You cannot shortchange other people's children, then get upset when someone does not do right by your son and daughter where you send them to school. Okay? So it's personal because I see far too many teachers who have just stopped teaching, who just show up. I was in a classroom last week in Philadelphia, a high school biology class. The teacher is showing students Finding Nemo on the video. How does that connect to biology in any kind of way? I mean, the kind of carelessness that we see in schools is just, in my mind, outright criminal. We have said these kids don't matter anymore, and the kids see that. So we wonder why they leave as periods is because what happens oftentimes in this place called school. And we all collectively have got to figure out how we can respond to that. That makes sense to folks? All right, now let's keep going. I want to talk about a couple points before we get started too, because I talk to teachers quite frequently, and one of the things I hear is that, you know what about the parents? What about the parents? What about the parents? And I say, you're right, what about the parents? I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey's work. Stephen Covey talks about circle of concern and circle of influence. Let me see, how much influence and how much control do we have over what parents do? Say it again. Zero. Let's say it together, folks. Zero. Let's say it one more time. Zero. Let's get it out one more time. How much control? Zero. So, I'm a parent. I've got 4 children. I understand the role that parents play in children's lives. I understand that if parents do certain things, kids come to school much more prepared to be successful as learners. I understand a lot of parents may not do that. But I would be willing to bet that most parents want to be the best parents they can be, but oftentimes just don't have the know-how to do that. And I also want us to understand that as we talk about how we fix this, let's not spend our time with the things that we cannot control. We cannot control parents. So I tell my beginning teachers all the time, don't tell me about parents, because that's not what we control. What we should be focused on is what we have influence over, which is what happens in our classrooms every single day for those 6 or 7 hours, okay? So I tell my beginning teachers, just forget about parents. Just assume you'll get nothing from them. Because that way, if you do, then it's gravy. It's icing on the cake. But don't go in expecting, because there's a lot of factors as to why parents cannot do what you think that they should do, right? Had a teacher just about a month ago said, well, I had back to school night and only 5 parents showed up. That's a problem. But I said, you know what? My mother worked 2 jobs. She worked a 3 p.m. to midnight shift. My mother never went to back to school night. Didn't mean she wasn't concerned about my education. Okay? So many of the parents who don't show up doesn't mean that they don't care. You got parents who are doing the best they can to keep ends meeting so that they can keep a roof over the head of their children and put food on the table. Understand that. Have some sense of compassion about what happens in homes, okay? So we don't control parents, but we do have a circle of influence over what happens in our classrooms, okay? Now, here's a statement I make quite frequently. Teachers have been prepared to teach in classrooms that no longer exist. We're dinosaurs. So I'm still using the same lesson I used back in 1973, right? And I can't figure out why the kids aren't interested in it, right? Schools have changed. And the way in which, and I say this as a criticism for folks who do teacher preparation, which I do, we do not adequately prepare teachers to work in today's schools. We use a 1980s model for 2012. So that's why when they come to schools, you all have to retrain them, right? Part of the issue is we have half of all new teachers leave within the first 3 years. Think about that number for a second, half. We know that about 10% leave during the first year. Not after the first year, during the first year. 10%. These are folks who show up and teach on a Friday. And when they say, I'll see you, when they leave on Friday, they really mean I'll see you. I won't be seeing you again when I come back, right? They leave during the first year. What do you think is the number one reason why beginning teachers leave in the first 3 years? Discipline and respect, but you said it best. Say it one more time. One more time. They're not ready. They're not ready. What are they not ready for? 21st century learning. What else are they not ready for? Say it again. Overclouded classrooms. What else are they not ready for? Student behavior. What else are they not ready for? Paperwork, right. Right, what else are they not ready for? Juggling multiple tasks, right? I talk to beginning teachers and they have this real just naive is the nicest way to put it. A very naive way of what this work is going to look like, right? I go to schools on the first day of school and I watch beginning teachers and I look at them and they look so well put together and so nicely polished and so neatly coiffured. I'm thinking, wow, do you really know what you're getting into, right? And they have the nice little buns and the little, and then you look at them at the end of the day, the first day, and it looks like they walked through a car wash, right? Because the bun is gone, everything is all right. This is hard work. So people leave not because they don't know their content, not because they don't know how to lesson plan, not because they don't have strategies and skills with certain content. They leave oftentimes because we see all kind of research on this. They say they did not know so much of what happens outside of the school has an impact on what goes on inside the classroom. So part of what we have to do and what we need to talk about is what happens outside the classroom that affects what we do and how we respond to it, okay? So let me give you real quickly a look at classrooms in the United States. This is one of the reasons why so many teachers leave, and this is why your job is so difficult, but why we must think about how we respond to it. I'm sorry this is so small. I want to give you a snapshot of classrooms in the United States. This is based off data from the U.S. Department of Education, U.S. Department of Children and Family Services, and the U.S. Census Bureau. What this data is, if we were to take a classroom of 30 and shrink it down with current demographics being as they are in schools today, okay, a classroom of 30. So what we would see, this is a national snapshot. 12 of our 30 students would live in poverty. Now, depending on where you work, that number could be as high as 30 out of 30. I would contend that this is the number one reason why it is difficult for us to help certain students. Poverty is a huge challenge, right? Poverty is a huge challenge. It makes it very difficult to effectively teach kids who come from impoverished backgrounds. I want to re-stress this point though. It makes it difficult, not impossible. Let me say that one more time. Difficult, not impossible, right? If it were impossible, a lot of us in this room would not be here. Am I accurate on that? So it's possible. Difficult, but not impossible, right? Now, what we also know, 3 out of the 30 would live in what's called extreme poverty. What is extreme poverty? A family of 4 or more living in a household with an income of $10,000 or less. Think about that for a second. $10,000 or less. There are students in the Dallas Independent School District who fit this profile right here. Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question. Is that 3 on top of the other 12 or part of the
3 is part of the 12. Good, thank you for clarifying. So 3 would live in extreme poverty, okay? We're talking about young people who barely are in households where ends can be met, which comes to another point I'll get to in a second. 10 out of the 30 students would be non-white. We got a racial divide in schools we don't want to talk about, right? We've got a more racially diverse group of students than we've ever had. 85% of our teachers are white, and we want to act as if race does not matter. It does, folks. It does. We'll get to that in a second, all right? Well, we also know 1 out of 3 would not speak English as their primary language. Think about that for a second. 1 out of 3 would not speak English as their primary language. They would speak one of the more than 150 languages spoken in schools across this country. That number is going to go up. By show of hands, how many folks here speak more than one language? Good, you're better than most. That's a healthy number. Nationally, only 5% of our teachers speak more than one language. We cannot effectively teach kids if we can't communicate with them. I'm in Los Angeles. Los Angeles, our district is about 80% Latino. About half of those students are language learners. And in 2001, we outlawed bilingual education. Said you cannot use any primary language to learn the secondary language. To me, that's another outright criminal act. It tells kids that we don't value your language. Right? How do you do that with so many, when you get tens of thousands of students who don't speak English as their primary language, but they cannot use Spanish as a way to help them acquire the second language, okay? And we wonder why certain kids are not being successful in classrooms. Well, we also know 5 of our 30 students will not be reared by their parents. They'd be reared by either grandparents or foster parents. I met a woman about 6 months ago. She was 89 years old. She was raising her great-great-great-grandchildren. More than likely, you have many students in your classrooms who are being reared by grandparents. There's a disproportionate number of African American children who are in foster care, being raised by foster parents. So part of what you need to understand is what home looks like is very different than what it may have looked like for us, okay? Students who are in foster care oftentimes move from home to home to home, placement to placement to placement. We've got a project going on right now. We're talking to foster youth. We're finding that the average number of placements that kids have before they turn 18 is about 12. 12 different homes. We have one young lady, she said she had 35 different placements before she graduated from high school. 35. So instability is a big issue here, okay? Let me keep going because I know you know a lot of this. 1 out of 30 would be homeless. My guess is that many of you in this room have individual students who are homeless. How many folks, by showing hands, know they have homeless students? Look around. Look around. The numbers are going up. So we talk about poverty, we mean young people who come to our classrooms who have not had anything to eat since the prior day's lunch, right? Some students who we know who wear the same set of clothes 3, 4, 5 days at a time, right? Students who oftentimes are residing, who are living in cars, living in shelters, going from pillow to post with parents, trying to find any place for any kind of decent kind of shelter. And at this time of the year, it's even more challenging because the weather is a huge challenge. We feel pressed just to walk in from the parking lot to get inside because it's so cold. Can you imagine what families live like who are on the streets when this is happening? So that's why I ask you, you know, we can talk all we want to about the lessons and the strategies and the skills, and we have that, but this is about human compassion we have for the people we teach, or the lack thereof, okay? Now, how do you know that the students you had were homeless? I'm curious. How did you know? Because oftentimes students don't disclose that. They tell you. Okay, how else did you know? Did you suspect in some way, shape, or form that the students were homeless? Same dirty clothes every day, right? No lunch money, right? Folks, this is becoming more and more commonplace, okay? So, I mean, we all had a psychology 101. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Maslow tells us that you can't get to this stuff here, right, until you deal with what? Yeah, basic. Yeah, until you feel safety, you feel fed, those kinds of things. We're expecting kids to walk in and just open up books and start working when they haven't had a meal in who knows how long, right? You see it in classrooms sometimes. You see it at the cafeteria. How many of our young students are hoarding, right? You're not eating your lunch. Let me have your apple. Let me take your milk. Because it's not about just in that moment. It's about what I'm going to eat later on this evening, what I may have to eat tomorrow, what I can give to my younger brother or sister. This is just a reality we have to be sensitive to, folks. This is part of what happens in schools today, okay? What we also know, 6 of the 30 students will have moved at least 4 times before they've reached the 3rd grade. Students are moving a lot today, right? How many times have we seen the student who shows up in September, is with us for about 3 months, then all of a sudden just disappears? Then right before testing in April or May, guess who shows back up? That student you haven't seen in months, right? Students are moving because families are moving, oftentimes in pursuit of employment opportunities, okay? Students are moving from place to place. It's hard to provide consistent education if students are not there. That's why your jobs are as difficult as they are at times, okay? One part we don't talk about that we need to, 7 out of the 30 students, 7 out of the 30 will be victims of some type of physical, sexual, verbal, or emotional abuse before they turn 18. 7 out of 30. This is according to the Department of Children and Family Services. And what they tell us is that for every one case that's reported, there's another case that probably should be reported, but is not. So let's do the math for a second here. If we know about 7 out of the 30, and there's another case that should be reported for each one we know about, what's that tell us? 14. Almost half. So again, it's a sure bet that in most of your classrooms, there are students that you are interacting with every single day who are victims of some type of abuse. Now, I come back to Maslow again. It is difficult to get kids to want to come in to think and learn if they've got some of the most horrific kinds of realities that many of us could ever begin to think about happening in their lives every single day. My wife is a children's social worker, so I hear her talk about these cases, and some of you know them and you know them well. She's got a case right now, 11-year-old girl, lives with her mom. Mom finds a boyfriend. Boyfriend moves in with the family. Boyfriend doesn't have work, so he'll babysit the kids. You know where this is going, right? So mom's working. The child comes to her teacher and says that she doesn't like the boyfriend. She doesn't like the boyfriend because, as it turns out, the boyfriend has been sexually molesting the young girl. She tells her mom. What do you think mom says? Mom doesn't believe it. She's trying to come between her and her boyfriend. So she puts the girl out the house. So if you have that student in your classroom, what do you think her mindset is going to be when she walks into your classroom? Who cares? Why is this important right now, right? This is far more common than we want to acknowledge. I remember years back when I taught young man DeMarcus, I'll never forget him. Many of you ever have the students who walk in your class and they're angry every single day, right? It's 8 o'clock in the morning, like, what are you mad about already? Just angry. How many of us have had that student? Yeah. Right, just angry. DeMarcus was one of my angry students. Every single day, DeMarcus would walk in angry, looking for conflict, looking for somebody to mess with. So one time I said, DeMarcus, let's talk. What's going on? Let's talk about it. He said, I hate my life. So you think, how does a 12-year-old say, I hate my life? What's going on? Talk to me about it. DeMarcus goes on to explain to me about the fact that he and his 3 younger siblings and his mother live in a motel, a little one-room motel. And they kind of go from motel to motel to motel. But what he talks about, what's even more heart-wrenching, is the fact that his mother is a prostitute. He talks about the fact that every night these men come over to the house and what he has to see them do to his mother. And when these men get upset with his mother, how they start beating his mother up. So when you talk about a young man who's angry, he says, I just want to kill these men because I see them beat up on my mother all the time. So you got this young man who walks into your classroom, and this is what he's seeing. How do you expect him to want to all of a sudden now read Johnny Appleseed? Is that even going to register on his radar? So part of what I'm trying to get started, and this cuts across all racial and ethnic backgrounds, cuts across all different socioeconomic categories. You have students who are just damaged in ways that we could never put our finger on. And that's what makes our job so complicated, right? You got kids who have, like I said, just situations that are just beyond. We're talking about, folks, this is almost half. Almost half. By show of hands, how many folks know you have had students who fall into these categories? Look around. Almost every hand goes up. So part of what I'm asking you to do is to probe, is to pry, is to listen to what your kids are saying. Because we can't get to content until we get to where our kids are as human beings. We cannot forget, and I know you've got testing demands. I know administrators put a lot on your plate. I understand that. I've been in schools. I know what that's all about. But sometimes we have got to push back and say, you know what? We are forgetting about the fact that young people are coming to us broke, right? I've got a colleague of mine in San Francisco who's doing research right now on young people in San Francisco public schools. And what they're finding, they're working with the medical community. And they're finding that many of the characteristics that the students that they are working with have behavior that's consistent with post-traumatic stress syndrome. The same kind of conditions that we diagnose with men and women who come from war over in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because what kids oftentimes see and encounter in their day-to-day realities is just not healthy. It's just not normal. It's just not whole. And then they walk into our classrooms and they expect us to be able to work miracles. In many cases, and I hate to say this, but I wonder if some of these issues are beyond our training, beyond our pay grade. Because we're talking about students who have deeply, deeply suited emotional, psychological issues that they're dealing with, and we're telling them to sit down so we can start doing algebra. Or we can sit down and start working on writing paragraphs, okay? So I say all that to say this is what we have to be aware of, but there are things we can do to respond to that. I want to get into, okay? Any questions or comments? I want to make sure I'm not talking over you. Everybody's okay? Okay. Now, this is what disturbs me. Let's look at reading scores. NAEP data, 2009, looks at reading scores across race, ethnicity, gender, disability status, et cetera, et cetera. Here's where I'm concerned, because despite all these challenges, what we're seeing in schools, white students, 42% of fourth graders are at grade level, 42%. So the inverse of that means 58% are not. So my contention is if we started and stopped our conversation with just white students, that would be a problem. Any group where you have half of the students are not reading at grade level is a big problem, okay? I maintain the NAEP data looks at students by grade 4. I'm a former elementary school teacher. I would say grade 4 is way too late. That if students are not reading by grade 2, the likelihood that they'll ever catch up is not very likely. So when you look at these data, 42% are at grade level, 58% are not at grade 4. The data only gets worse the longer these kids stay in school. So like I said, if we started with white students and stopped our conversation there, we would have a huge problem. But as you can see from these numbers, it gets significantly worse with our two largest groups right here. Black and Hispanic students, less than 20% of each group are reading at grade level. So the inverse of that is you're talking about 80% or more are not reading by grade 4. 80%. I mean, when I say that number sometimes, you just have to, 80%. We are not going to thrive as a society if our two largest groups of people are not reading. It cannot happen. We have all kinds of data that shows that this group right here, Hispanics, are expected to be our largest subgroup in the next 25 years. You are in Texas, you see it. I'm in California, excuse me. Largest subgroup, not largest minority group, the largest subgroup, right? So this will be our largest subgroup in the nation in the next 25 years. We cannot thrive as a nation if we have our largest groups are not reading at basic levels, okay? And the numbers get more disturbing. I mean, you look at limited English proficiency students, less than 10%. We do a major disservice here. Student with disabilities, same thing. So again, part of what we have to understand is how do we begin to engage young people in how they can become, I mean, reading is so critical because we know if kids cannot read, everything else suffers. Math suffers, science suffers, social studies suffers, everything suffers. So that's why there's got to be a real explicit focus on reading, okay? Now, some people tell me this is not about race, it's about class. Poor kids just don't do well. So, okay, I've looked into that. We've looked into that. So if it was about class, then we would see all poor kids would be about on par across racial and ethnic groups. What the data tell us is not the case. Then we look at poor kids and we look at reading proficiency, white and Asian kids still outperform black and brown kids. Over and over again. We look at affluent populations. Affluent Asian and white kids outperform affluent Latino and black kids. Folks, I'm going to say it one more time. We got racial issues in our schools that we do not want to talk about. There are folks who walk into classrooms, teachers who walk into classrooms who are petrified of the young people that they have to teach. I don't know how else to say it. It may be uncomfortable, may not feel good, but you can see it, right? There are attitudes and beliefs that folks have about black and brown kids that they do not want to talk about, but they're real. I see some of you shaking your head because you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions that exist about those kids. We know when we say those kids who those kids are. All right? I'm saying I walk into classroom after classroom after classroom where teachers tell me it's the kids, it's the kids, it's the kids. In a middle school in Los Angeles about 2 weeks ago, one of our teachers the classroom is just hell on wheels, out of control beyond belief. Kids are up, throwing stuff, running around like, what is going on in here? She says the kids, they don't listen. They don't respect me. They won't sit down. They won't do work. She's trying to just do all kinds. Sit down, stop. She's yelling, it's chaotic in here. I have to take over the class. Look, sit down. Let's start doing some things here. So in a matter of minutes, we get them to sit down, but the bell rings and she's telling me about these kids are the problem. You all probably work with colleagues who tell you the same thing. It's the kids, it's the kids, it's the kids, right? So we talked about some things she could start doing. She's still not buying it. These kids are different. You just don't know them. Fine. I leave her classroom. I walk down the hallway on my way out the building. I see the same kids from her classroom in another classroom. In that classroom, the same group of kids that she says were the problem are sitting there engaged, working, on task, doing all the things that she said that they cannot do. So I went back and I got her. I said, I want you to come here. I want you to see something. I want you to take a look in this classroom. I don't know who the teacher was. I said, let's look at what's going on in this classroom. Because, see, the issue is if the kids are the problem, the kids are going to be the same no matter where they go, right? So if these kids were out of control, if they were bad, if they were discipline problems, they would have been the same way in this other teacher's classroom, but they weren't. So then to me, the issue is it must not be the kids then. We got to start doing what? We got to look at us. Part of what we know is that so much of this is tied to expectations, what we think and believe about kids. You all probably saw the study that came out, what, about 8 years ago? Harvard Ed reviewed 2 fourth-grade classrooms, right? 2 brand new teachers. One teacher was given a group of students that she was told were the lowest group from the year before, despite the fact they were really the highest group. The other teacher was given a group of kids, she was told they were highest group, despite the fact they were the lowest group. And they followed these 2 teachers over the course of a year to see what happened. And you can imagine what happened, right? The teacher who had the low performers, but she thought they were high performers, when she watched what they were doing, she got nervous because she thought that she was messing them up because they weren't doing the kinds of things she thought they were supposed to do. So they had her journal all what was happening. She went back and looked at her instruction, looked at her curriculum, because she thought, you know, I can't let these kids who are the high performers not do well because then they're going to look at me. And guess what happened over time in that classroom? Kids began to show steady improvement over time because she believed it wasn't the kids, it was her. Inverse of what happened in the other classroom, the teacher who had what she thought was the low-performing students, but they were really the high-performing students from the year before. In that classroom, she saw how those students were performing, and she got suspicious. She thought they were cheating, she thought people were helping them with homework, and while there wasn't a major drop-off, there was a slight drop-off over time. Shows that expectations are huge in terms of what we think and believe about young people, okay? So class and race both matter. Here's one I also think is big. Look at SAT scores for a second. How many high school folks do I have here? By show of hands. Okay, this will be up your alley. SAT scores. And this is why I think we have to have a real honest conversation about race. College Board looks at SAT scores by race and class. Black students with family income of $100,000 or more, okay? So these are relatively well-to-do black students. SAT score, 930, excluding the writing section, 930, okay? Latino students, family income, $100,000 or more. SAT score, 960, excluding the writing portion of the exam. And what the College Board does, because the College Board, I give them credit, has raised questions about equity and access across race and class. They look at white students who take the SAT, who have a family income of $20,000 or less. So these are poor white children, okay? Their SAT scores, 1,000. How do we explain that? How do poor white kids outperform well-to-do black and brown kids? I'm trying to wrap my head around this one. Somebody give me a possible explanation, suggestion. Expectations. Yes?
Education of their parents and their household conversations matter.
Okay. So the conversations they have in their household, but you would think that poor white parents are not having conversations that well-to-do black and brown parents aren't having.
But their education might have been different growing up.
Education may have been different. Okay, that's one. Okay, help me out.
Books in the house.
Books in the house. But you would think again, you would think that poor white kids would not have as many books as the black and brown kids would have. Yeah, talk to me, please. Cultural proficiency in school. So culture matters, yes.
Culture and expectations, again, because the white rich and the black rich are used to have everything given to them.
Okay, cultural proficiency. But still, part of what gets it, these are poor white kids. $20,000 or less. Yes, sir. Talk to me.
Source of the income.
Source of the income. Talk about that.
Where's that $100,000 coming from?
Okay. So the $100,000 may not be what it seems on some level. Is that what you're trying to get at?
I mean, it's something they report, obviously.
Yeah, but so these are all good, and I'm still not sure the answer, but I'm trying to figure out, you would think these kids go to what are supposed to be better schools. You would think. And you would think these kids go to schools that are not quite as, so I'm not, to me, I think all the things you said, but to me, this speaks to a big problem. Yes, please. Here, take this.
It seems like to me what's going on.
Oh, a little bit closer to your mouth.
It seems like what's going on to me, these kids in the $100,000 bracket, they are taking
Ah,
Now,
okay.
these kids that are
Okay.
poor,
Okay.
they know what life is all about.
Okay. Okay.
And so it's instilled in them that I'm going to try very hard and succeed in life. But these other, maybe they want these $150,000 shoes.
Not $150,000 shoes. So you're saying that because the kids who come from more affluent backgrounds, they may not, they just take this for granted, right? Go ahead. You have a theory?
I mean, I was just, so my thought with that was why is it not happening the other way? So if we were to look at, less than $20,000 a year, but I think there's something to be said for like role models and what kids see around them.
Ah, okay. Okay. This is good. This is good.
So like when we're looking at kids that are, from households making less than $20,000 a year, then, maybe then that like role model issue or like, culture, pervasive culture comes in. So like, oh, a poor white kid might look around them and say, this is what I'm supposed to do. Whereas,
Yeah. Yeah, so role models are big, and so part of the one explanation could be even if you're white and poor, you still see models of success all around you, right? And you still think that something is possible that you can accomplish. If you're black or brown, you're somewhat limited in terms of what you see as it relates to role models. That's why it pains me. You can go to school districts all across this country and talk to the young black and brown men, young boys, and ask them what they aspire to do. What do you think the two most common things that are said? Sports and music, right? I want to be a rapper, I want to be a singer. If I have one more young man who tells me he wants to be a rapper, I'm going to hurt somebody, because if we didn't have another rapper, we would be just fine, right? Right, but can't write a poem. How does that happen, right? So issues around what young people see, I think is huge, and we cannot diminish that. And so that's why I think it's important, especially, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm shortchanging our young ladies, because we need a lot of work there. But I see our young boys in these two groups right here, and it just pains my heart, because we give up on them extra early. And there's a place that they oftentimes end up. There's a trajectory. They don't learn how to read, right? They become discipline problems. Then we end up retaining them.
But a lot of them can read, and they still go into prison.
Yeah,
There's a
right.
lot of intelligent people
Right, a lot of highly intelligent young
not
people.
being challenged.
Absolutely.
They're not using what
Right.
they know, challenge it to something positive.
Absolutely. Well said.
So much negative.
You want to come on up here and do this? You right on point. No, you right on point. No, I agree with you 100%.
Because you said even with that's $100,000 kids come from homes where their parents make over $100,000.
Yes.
And yet they're not excelling as high as the white kids whose parents do. And I think sometimes it's a value system.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it depends on what the white kids are getting.
Yep.
As far as their school, what they're giving them, the books,
Mm-hmm.
the computers, what they're being exposed to versus those kids, what they're being exposed to. And the role models, again, like you said, who do you see? And what are the expectations?
Yep. Yep.
That matters. What you expect.
That's
of
right.
a kid
That's right.
matters.
See, and I think you got kids who walk into schools and their teachers, despite the fact that these kids come from well-to-do backgrounds, there are teachers who still don't expect them to be successful. And that there are teachers who have these students, and despite the fact that they're poor, they're still consciously and subconsciously a belief that these kids will do well, right? And here's the thing that we have to talk about. I said we need to talk about race, right? So white teachers, because they're a large portion of our teachers, are responsible for a lot of this, right? Because they're 80% of the teaching force, so they're responsible for a large part of it. But let me be clear. White teachers are not the only ones who are guilty of this. Teachers of color are also complicit in having these low expectations for students of color. So to me, I hear people who say, well, we would do better off if you had black teachers teaching black kids, or if you had brown teachers teaching brown kids. I have worked in schools with folks who look like the students that they teach, and they have been god-awful by those students. So to me, it has nothing to do with your skin color. It's about what you believe in those students. How well do you understand their cultural background? Someone mentioned cultural proficiency, right? How do you find ways to connect and engage with kids who come to your classrooms highly capable, highly intelligent, but somehow we don't allow them to manifest that brilliance in our classrooms, okay?
Sometimes you can't do anything. You can try. Because I think now of a student who I know is smart and bright and capable. Doesn't matter how much I tell him, he's bright, smart, and capable.
Yes.
When he leaves the classroom, he's not at school most of the time. It doesn't matter the conversations we've had. I feel like I've lost, that student is lost. No matter the conversations I had with him, no matter how much I told him how bright he is, how to channel this and how to do that,
Yep.
I feel like he's lost.
How old is he?
He's 14.
14. Let me tell you what probably is happening before I come to this young lady back here. And this is why it's so important. When you have young people who have been beat up, I'm talking about beat up psychologically, and the message has always been conveyed that you cannot, you cannot, you cannot, you will not, you will not, you will not, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We are, here's the bottom line, folks. We are the products, everybody in this room, we are the products of other people's expectations. Everybody. We're the products of other people's expectations. When I was younger, my mother told my brother and I every single day, every day, you will go to college. When you go to college, after you finish from college, we heard that all the time. I cannot tell you how important it is to have somebody, some caring adult, who tells you you will be successful. Me and my brother, we just thought that college was like the 13th grade. It was just something everybody did, right? After you graduate, you just went. My mother had never stepped foot on a college campus until she dropped me off. But she said, you will go. So my thing is, when our words, I mean, we don't tend to understand the power of our words. What we say, kids hang on to. And by the time you get that young man at 14, who knows how much he has heard over the years about what he can't do. And I hate to say this because it pains me to say it. It's not only teachers who are guilty of this, but sometimes it's parents who are also guilty as well. So if you've got 13 years of somebody telling you what you can't do, what you won't do, you just like your daddy and he wasn't anything, right? You just like his daddy, he wasn't anything. When you hear this over and over and over again, by the time you turn 10, 11, 12 years old, you think, why do I bother? Nobody believes in me. Why should I believe in me, right?
I think that we're fighting another battle. We're fighting the outside. We're fighting drugs.
We are.
Kids are into drugs, and sometimes it doesn't matter what you say, because this young man, what I've heard is that he sells drugs. I don't know, but that's what I've heard. And so you're fighting that battle, trying to keep him from, you know.
It's a
that
dilemma.
outside
Outside, inside, yes.
Because I have a soft voice, I just might as well stand up. What I wanted to say, as you can see, is that it really, it's with us as educators, because we're educators, the education within ourselves does not stop. It should not stop. I myself was on Stanford, born and raised. I too, attended UCLA, and I taught in East LA. I taught in Watts. I taught in Culver City. And so coming here to Texas, I earned my master's degree in Austin, but I still needed to learn more and continue to learn more because in LA, we don't call Latino students Hispanic, we call them Latino, we call them Mexican, and what do we call Chicano? When I went down to UT, I was told that I needed to address my students Hispanic. And whereas my students that I worked with in East LA, they said that what they called Hispanic was derogatory. So because I was a transplant and I'm in a different state, a different type of community, I needed to educate myself.
Yep. So this is big. I'm glad you said this, because part of it is we've got to recognize the change. So I maintain culture matters, okay? Culture matters. We've got to listen. Here's our moral imperative. We need to listen to our young people. Listen to them, right? Lisa Delpit said, listening requires not only open eyes and ears, but open our hearts and minds. We do not really see through our eyes or hear through our ears, but through our beliefs. It is not easy, but it is the only way to learn what it might feel like to be someone else, and the only way to start the dialogue. Kids are coming to us every single day trying to tell us about their realities. The question is, to what degree are we willing to listen? If we listen, we have an opportunity to begin to engage kids. Some of the challenges we see in schools today, not all, some of them are not new, right? But the question is, what is it that teachers are willing to do to listen and empathize and then help students become successful, okay? Because here's what happens. Why kids underperform? Two different camps, I think. On this side, you've got deficit theory. There are folks who I talked about earlier who just don't believe kids can learn. It's negative, negative, negative. The culture is deficient. The language is not right. The home is not good. So they want to change the child when it's all said and done. What happens when you try to change a child? Tell me what happens. That child resists, right? There's a wonderful little book I think every teacher should read. It's called I Won't Learn From You by Herbert Cole. I love that book because in that book, Herbert Cole talks to young people and asks them why do they put forth effort and try in some classrooms and why do they not do it in other classrooms. And it's very simple. It's not rocket science. The kids talk over and over again about the teachers who take the time out to listen to them, to learn from them, who hold them accountable are the teachers who they care most about because they feel like those teachers care most about them. And for those teachers who don't do that, they say they make the deliberate choice to not learn from those teachers. Many of us have had those students who make the conscious choice to not learn, right? Highly capable, highly intelligent students who make the decision to not learn, despite the fact that they don't realize it hurts them more than it hurts us, right? And some of the students go as far as saying, not only will I not learn, but I'm going to sabotage this entire classroom so that nobody learns, right? How many of us have had that student in our classroom? Absolutely, right? They go out of their way to sabotage. And the one thing we can say about those students when we have them, they show up every single day, right? If there's one acknowledgement they get, it's for perfect attendance, and I think it's their jobs oftentimes to make it difficult for us. On the flip side, I don't think it's a matter of these kids having deficiencies, because I have teachers who tell me this all the time. We need to understand kids today are just different than what we were. And the sooner we come to grips with that, the better off we'll be. I think oftentimes we're assuming that, you know, when I was young, we did X, Y, and Z, and these kids do something different. Why can't they do things the way we did? Guess what? They're not us. And the sooner we can come to grips with that and understand that it's about how do we meet them halfway. I'm not saying we've got to come all the way to where they are. I'm not saying they've got to come all the way to we are, but oftentimes in classrooms, it's a tug of war, right? Teacher and student trying to figure out who's going to win. It's in a classroom in Chicago over the summer. This is some kind of reading recovery, some kind of program to help students get recovery units. High school classroom, I'll never forget this, I wish I had a camera. High school classroom, 11th graders, the teacher's doing an activity where she's doing a read aloud. So, you know, one student reads a couple sentences, she calls on another student to read a couple sentences, et cetera, et cetera. Now, all these students, I mean, my high school folks know, it's becoming painfully obvious that we've got kids who are 10th, 11th, 12th grade who are not able to read beyond 3rd or 4th grade level sometimes, right? So it was paining me to have this teacher have these students read aloud. She called on a young man named Andre. She said, Andre, pick up from where we just left off. Andre told her, I don't want to read, okay? She said, Andre, pick up where we just left off from. Andre said, I told you, I don't want to read. Let's stop it right there. What goes off in your mind when you hear that? Yeah, it's not brain science. My first thought was Andre probably can't read, but the teacher wanted to persist. So for the third time, she said, Andre, we're not moving forward until you start reading. What do you think Andre said? Right, he said, we're not moving forward then because I told you I'm not reading. And you know now all of a sudden it becomes a spectacle. So when Andre says that, all the kids say what? Ooh, right? You guys know, right? So now it's about ego for the teacher. Andre, she said the fourth time, I counted, Andre, you need to start reading. He told her, I told you, call somebody else because I don't want to read. What did the student say again? Ooh, right? The fifth time. Yeah, leave it alone, right? Leave it alone. Andre, if you don't start reading, I'm going to send you to the office. What do you think Andre did at that point in time? Andre got his backpack. He put it on his shoulder. He said, let's go. Right now, you cannot, this is what I'm saying, the difference. You cannot put, I don't think it's fair to put any student in that kind of spot where you essentially humiliate them. Andre knows his limitations and shortcomings. The fact that Andre even showed up to that classroom, I think speaks volumes, right? I think that teacher's got to find a way, and I talked to her afterwards, and her whole thing was, you know, it's about respect. I said, when I say read, you've got to at least try. But you cannot take, especially young black boys, and put them in that kind of situation where they feel humiliated in front of their peers, right? I said, perhaps you need to meet with Andre one-on-one, and you guys can start working on some things that he needs. I said, have you not heard him read before? Yeah, he's a struggling reader. That's why I wanted him to read. To me, that's not the approach to take. Part of the difference is, especially with regard to respect, and I try to convey this to many teachers, and I hope you all can understand what I'm trying to say here. When many of us were younger, adults automatically got respect for no other reason than the fact that they were adults, right? So if an adult came into a classroom, you shut your mouth up, you didn't have to know who it was, but it was an adult. And you automatically gave that person respect. That's just the way most of us, if not all of us, were raised. I hate to say it, but the reality is that day is long gone, right? Kids will tell you today, you have got to earn my respect. If I see you respect me, then I'll respect you. I don't necessarily like it, but I've got to understand that's the current reality that we live in today. I still see teachers who say, well, they should just automatically respect me because I'm the teacher. Well, good luck with that, because oftentimes that's not going to happen. And we have this tug of war, and at the end of the day, it's our students who end up losing, okay? So there's a cultural disconnect. Culturally speaking, kids come from one place, teachers come from another place, they collide. They don't coexist. And guess who loses at the end of the day? Students. Let me give you some examples. Because culture, I think race is important. We get fixated on race, but it's the cultural norms that cause us more problems than we want to recognize. Culture is what we all have. Everybody in this room. Okay? Had a white student who tried to tell me that white people don't have culture. I said, that's baloney. Everybody has culture. It's the stuff we do. It's how we live. It's how we communicate. It's the way we think. It's the way we live our lives every single day. Tell this story. My oldest son is 20 now. Years ago when he was in preschool, he was coming home every day with these pictures and drawings that he was getting from his classroom. But what I noticed is that the other students in his classroom were coming home with little number books and little letter books that they had worked on. So I asked this teacher, I said, who was white, and this is when I was in grad school, so he was one of the few kids of color in the classroom. I said, explain to me why Jabari doesn't have the little numbers in the books like the other students have. And she said, well, he's not quite ready to do that yet, so that's why he's not doing it. So, you know, as a parent, you kind of take a little bit of exception when someone tells you what your child cannot do. It's the same child who I see doing all these different numbers and letters at home. I said, well, how do you know he can't do it? She says, very simple. She said, just today, as a matter of fact. We sat down, we got ready to do our number of the day, and I asked Jabari to come join us at the table, and he said he didn't want to come join us, he wanted to draw. I said, so what did you do? She said, so I let him draw. I said, okay. She said, and then a couple days ago, when we were doing our word of the day, I encouraged him to come over and sit down with us where we were doing our work, and he said he wanted to paint. I said, so what did you do? She said, I let him paint. So I'm having this conversation with a very well-intentioned, well-meaning teacher. So she's telling me about how she asked him to come over and join the group, how she encouraged him to come over and join the group. One day she invited him to come over. So you know where I'm going with this, right? Right? So I said, let's stop the conversation right here because we have a communication problem. I said, so if I invite you to my party, you got two options, right? What are those two options? You can come or you can choose not to come, right? If I encourage you to do something, do you have to do it? No, right? Part of what I had to explain to her, I said, you're asking him if he wants to come work on the letter of the day, and he's thinking, you know, do I want to do this? No, I don't. I want to draw. And she would let him draw, right? So my son was loving this preschool thing because he had options, right? A lot of options. I said, what you've got to understand, for this black child, I said, the way we communicate with him is very different than what you're doing in this classroom. I said, we don't ask him if he would like to go to bed, right? It's time to take you behind the bed, right? We don't encourage him to come sit down to eat dinner. We tell him it's time to come sit down to eat, right? So in our household, I can't speak for anybody else's household, but in this household where this child is raised, you got to be much more direct in your communication. What I need you to do is come sit down and do X, Y, and Z. Then after you do that, then take you behind the bed, right? She explained to me that part of what she believed in was this Montessori approach, right? And it's the Montessori approach, you give kids options to decide when they choose to do, et cetera, right? I said, okay, that's fine for other people's children, but for my son, I need you to be a little bit more direct in what you need him to do. This is culture 101, because her way of communicating was just different than his. Now, I always think about that situation because if I don't intervene on his behalf, at some point in time, she's got to write up some kind of assessment on what kind of student he will be in kindergarten, right? And just based off what you've heard so far, what are some things that she might possibly say about him? Developmentally slow, maybe he should do pre-K another year, social skills are lacking, right? All the labels I think that we inadvertently put on boys of color more times than we want to admit. When it has nothing to do with kids' cognitive capacity, it has oftentimes to do with the cultural disconnect that exists between teachers and students. The very next day, as opposed to asking him and encouraging him to do these things, she told him what she needed him to do, and he did it with no problem. So I think about how many young kids, young boys in particular, fall through the cracks in schools, not because they're not capable. These are some of the most talented, most gifted kids we have in our schools, but we don't tap into their brilliance because culturally speaking, they're in different places, right? We've got to say, just because it's not my way doesn't mean that it's not okay, right? I'm in the classroom just what? About last week. Young 5th grader, he got the answer right. The teacher was calling on kids, he got the answer right. You know how kids do. He starts dancing, yeah, I got it, talking. This is what he does. He wants to celebrate what? His accomplishment. She said, sit down, I don't want to see that. He's thinking, well, look, I got the answer right, I'm happy about it. Right? He wasn't causing any kind of disruptions about how do we allow kids to be who they are if they're going to be academically successful. Kids are telling us over and over again, for me to be successful, I got to be more like you and less like me. And that's not going to work, folks. It's not going to work. So part of what we have to understand is that, look, language matters. Kids are telling us every single day school is irrelevant. What we teach them oftentimes is not consistent with what they see, hear, experience every single day. We got to tap into what our kids know. How do we do that? We got to begin to sort of engage in what I call a pedagogy of poverty. This is what I see, I'm sorry, a pedagogy of poverty. If we walk into classrooms, this is what we see more times than not. Here's how you assess whether a school or whether a teacher's doing what they should be doing, right? A lot of yes, no questions, constant directions, low-level tasks, going over tests, teaching to the test, right? Constant ditto sheets. It pains me to walk into schools and classrooms and see teachers giving ditto sheet after ditto sheet after ditto sheet. Sometimes do we give out ditto sheets? Yes. But should it be what we do all the time? I hope not. Right? This is what happens in a lot of our classrooms. This is when we know we've given up on young people. It's got to be more engaged learning. ASCD, Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, said that what this is all about oftentimes is time on task. How much time we spend on task. The more time we spend on task, the better the outcomes are for our students. They look nationwide, classrooms where teachers spent time on task and where teachers did not spend time on task. Elementary school, you got how many hours out the day? 7 hours, they said. How much time do you think is spent in the average classroom 7 hours out the day of high quality instruction where teachers and kids are actually engaging in instructional discourse? 7 hours. Give me a guess. What do you think? How long? How long? Hour and a half, 3 hours? Ooh, we wish we could be that good. How many hours? 55 minutes out of a 7-hour day. When you take out all the disruptions, the sit down, the be quiet, can I go to the bathroom, the announcements, the line up, we lose a lot of time. So when we have all these conversations about kids need to spend more time in school, I said, to me, that doesn't matter. We don't use the time we have currently, right? 55-minute period for secondary. How much time do you think is spent on task with high instructional discourse? How many? 7 minutes. We're wasting time, folks, and we're wasting time with a lot of this stuff right here. I say let's raise the bar for our young people. Let's begin to move to a pedagogy of plenty where we give them authentic tasks, okay? Things that are centered around experiences that students know. Quality resources, connecting school with home, culture, and community. This is big right here. If we find things that kids are interested in, even the most lowest performers will start to put forth effort, okay? But so much of what we do is disconnected. Problem-focused learning. How do we help kids to think about solving problems? I mean, we've gotten away from that, right? Provide these dilemmas for kids and have them read texts that are about issues and problems that they experience in their communities every single day. Collaborative work with issues of deep concern to students. Engagement in substantive dialogue, discussion. Kids like to argue and debate, right? Why not have them engage in this around course content? Even for students who are struggling readers, I think we still need to do read alouds. As teachers, we stop around 2nd, 3rd grade. I think that even 12th graders need to have someone who reads out loud to them every single day. One of the ways we help struggling readers become more proficient readers is by doing what? Having them hear what it sounds like. So even if students are struggling as readers, if they hear it every day or hear it with some degree of consistency, just because students can't read doesn't mean that they can't think. So you hear the text, now I want you to tell me what you think about the text, right? What do you think about this character? What do you think about the plot? What do you think is going to happen next? Let's predict what's going to happen next. This is about developing critical thinking even for students who are not proficient readers, okay? Making meaning. How do you interpret this? I mean, every student in your classroom has experiences, life experiences. It's our job to find out what those are and then tap that into what we do with regard to, especially when we're teaching language arts and areas around literacy, because that is such a rich area to do that. The kind of text we bring in can be so powerful. I'm going to put somebody on the spot. I saw this young lady over here. You had a book that you were reading. Can I hold your book up for a second? This is one of my favorite books of all time, The Pact. If folks are not familiar with this, this is a book about 3 African-American men who make a pact when they're what, in 3rd grade? Is it 3rd grade, 4th grade? They're going to hold each other accountable. Is it high school they made it? I thought it was younger than that. I thought it was, you sure? Okay, you started. But the idea being, when young people read about things that have relevance to them, I think it can do miracles in terms of their interest level, okay? There are all kinds of texts that we have got to find ways to bring into our classrooms that allow students to say, you know what, this kind of sounds like my experiences. This looks like my neighborhood. This sounds like my family structure. One of my most favorite books of all time is a book called Our America, okay? Our America is a book where, I forget the author's name. You can Google it, but Our America, 2 young black boys. The author gives them a tape recorder. It says, I want you just to tape record and interview people in your environment, in your neighborhood. Give us your view of America. I mean, it is just captivating. I have my 3rd graders read it. I have my college students read it because it's that accessible of a text. And they talk to parents, they talk to their teachers, they talk to people in their communities, and it just gives a gripping account of how young folks in poor circumstances, how they live and survive. My students would read that and they would not want to stop reading the book. That's when you know you've got something. When you've got young kids who oftentimes who don't want to engage, and sometimes you've had this, the bell rings, they don't move, right? They ask, can we come back? Can we come at lunch? Some of you probably do that. You know students who just will not leave your room because they know something's happening in your room that's not happening elsewhere because you're tapping into something that matters to them, right? You're encouraging them. You're telling them that they can be successful. I always talk about my 5th grade teacher. She was that teacher for me. That's when the light bulb went on. Miss Russell, I will never forget that woman. Miss Russell was one of these teachers who was no nonsense, right? I tell people throughout the course of my 5th grade year, we may have had recess maybe half a dozen times. Miss Russell told us, if you can't spell recess, you're not going to recess, right? She was no nonsense, right? Every single day, we used to have to come up, she had a lectern at the front of the desk, front of the room, and she would call us up 5 at a time. And you had to bring her your homework. And she would look at the homework. She had those glasses that would sit down on her nose like this, right? And she would look at the homework. And she would look at you. And she would go through and she'd look at the homework. And she looked at you. And she didn't stress grades. She said, every single day, I want your personal best, right? If she didn't think that homework was your personal best, what do you think she did with that paper? She ripped it up, threw it in the trash.
Look at you.
Right. See, if we did that to kids today, they would need counseling, right? These kids, anyway, she ripped it up. She said, I want your personal best. Now, here's the key with Miss Russell. I hated that woman at the time because she was just mean, she was hard, she just never let up. But what happened in Mrs. Russell's class is that she told us that if you don't learn, then it's my fault as your teacher. So I've got to do something different. So she would keep us in at recess. She kept us in at lunch. I learned how to this day, whenever I've got something I'm studying for, a test or exam, I use index cards. And I drill myself over and over again. My kids still today use index cards. I got that from Miss Russell because she showed us how to study. We tell kids, go home and study. What does that mean for kids? I don't know what that means. Study what? I mean, stare at the pages and turn. No, what do you do to study? Miss Russell showed us how to be successful, right? She kept us after school. She told us over and over again, you will be successful in my classroom, right? Now, here's the key. Hated Miss Russell. I had some god-awful thoughts about that woman when I was in 5th grade, right? If she could just get hit by a truck but not die, but I didn't want her to come back. I mean, terrible thoughts, but here's the key. Here's the key. Miss Russell didn't care that we didn't like her. Say that one more time, folks, because this is important. She didn't care that we didn't like her. One of the big mistakes I see teachers make today is they think that if I can be friends with my students, maybe they'll do what I want them to do. Big mistake, right? I hear teachers say, well, I'm going to Facebook my kids and we'll put them on. Your job is not to befriend your students, it's to teach them, right? Now, Miss Russell didn't care about the fact that we didn't like her. She wanted us to learn. And I think what happens in teaching, you go through a 4-stage process. I think you oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes you have to start off being strongly disliked by your students, right? I tell my beginning teachers that the way I was taught, you should not smile until Thanksgiving, you should not laugh until Christmas. Because if kids see that they can take advantage of you, they will, right? It's like a shark smelling blood and water, right? They got a weak teacher, they know. So you got to start off being strongly disliked. That's where Miss Russell was. She didn't care. Then you move to the point, that second phase, where you oftentimes have what's called grudging respect. Because in our classroom, what happened, we learned that, you know what? Something's happening different in this class that didn't happen in the previous years. Kids are starting to learn. And the kids who were getting recognized on honor roll were coming from Mrs. Russell's class. So it was grudging respect. Grudging respect ultimately turned into genuine respect. We recognized that we were learning, and she was the reason why we were learning. And at the end of the day, by the time we left 5th grade, Miss Russell could have told us to go jump in the Pacific Ocean, and we would have been fighting to see who could have done it first, because we realized that she believed in us. But most teachers don't want to start at that place of not being well liked by their students. My argument is that oftentimes some of the most effective teachers usually start there, and sometimes they stay there. They say, I don't care if you like me. The question is, do you learn from me, right? We did a study about 10 years ago. We interviewed and surveyed over 4,000 students from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade, and said, when you learn, when you do the best academically, what happens in that classroom? The number one answer overwhelmingly that came back to us time and time again was what? I have a teacher who cares. A teacher who cares. We asked the question, how do you know if the teacher cares? Students said over and over again, because he or she teaches us. We walk in the classroom, we know what to do. There's routine, there's structure. If we don't bring in homework, there's accountability. If they say they're going to do something, they follow through on it. So kids are saying that they want the very things that many of us do. It's oftentimes us as adults, we then sort of back up. Kids are going to resist. And when they resist, we just resist and say, oh, well, he doesn't want to learn. My argument is sometimes we've got to somehow, we know better than what our kids know, as much as they don't realize that. We've got to be able to push them in a way that lets them know, look, in this classroom, I can't say for anybody else in any other class, in here, here's what's going to happen. You come in, this is what you do, this is when you do it, this is how you do it. If you don't do it, here are the ramifications. And it's consistency, because you know what happens. Kids keep score in their minds, right? They want to know, how come you gave her a verbal warning, but the first time I said something, you put my name on the board? They're keeping score constantly, and they see you're not consistent, they will call you on it. How come she can get up and sharpen her pencil, but then when I got up, you told me to sit back down? So you got to think, what am I doing? How come you call on the girls all the time, but you never call on the boys in this classroom? Those things, kids are picking up on those things all the time, okay? Now, what else do we do? Let me talk about this real quick. Culture matters. I said that earlier because I see this happening in many ways. You all familiar with this culture and how it shapes discourse and how kids communicate? Because this is another way that culture is big. I maintain in our class, and we have a lot of what I call topic-centered speakers. Topic-centered speakers are people who speak in very straightforward, to-the-point ways. Very linear, non-descriptive, straightforward, and lacks context. As opposed to people who are on the flip side, who are topic changers, where they connect the dots, A to B to C to D, okay? This happens in our classrooms a lot. So I use two of my kids as an example of how this plays out. My 15-year-old son will come home from school, and I'll ask him, how was school today? And he'll say, fine. What'd you do today? Somebody said, nothing. Yep, nothing. You've been in the place 7 hours. Give me something. Spanish. What else? Science. What else? Lunch.
There was a fight in the
Yeah, there's fight. Yeah, right. So he's here. 1 or 2 words. After a while, okay, get out of here. You bore me. You won't tell me anything. Okay, fine. My daughter, who's 16, ask her the exact same question. How was school today? I know when I ask her, I probably should sit down because we're going to be a while, right? Here's honestly how the conversation goes sometimes. So Dad, school was good today, but when I first got there, my stomach was hurting. And I think my stomach was hurting because I ate that last piece of cake last night, because I knew if I didn't eat it, you were probably going to eat it, and I didn't want you to eat it. And anyway, it was my birthday cake and wasn't yours, so I figured I should have the last cake. And next year, I don't want chocolate cake for my birthday. I want to have lemon cake for my birthday party. And I'm going to tell you right now, Dad, next year I'm not inviting Shantae, I'm not inviting Jessica, and I'm not inviting Elizabeth to my party, because all 3 of them think they're cuter than everybody in school. And Dad, Shantae told me her father is taller than, is he taller than you, Dad? I didn't think he was, right? So if I stay with her, we'll ultimately get back to my original question, which was what? How was school? But for my daughter, she's got to connect all the dots. A connects to B, that connects to C, that connects to D, right? I think my own unscientific research, I think this is more gender specific than anything else, right? My wife is the exact same way. I'll come home, she'll say, your brother called you. I'll say, what did he say? She said, well, I was sitting here on the couch and the phone rang. I said, hello, he said, hello. Don't need to know all the details, right? These folks don't want details, they want bottom line. These folks have to give you every specific piece of the pie, because if they don't, it's incomplete, right? Now, here's how it plays out in classroom, because I maintain every teacher knows who their topic chainer is. You're shaking your head, you know, right? And oftentimes we overlook those topic chainers because they take forever to get to the point, right? And we're sitting in our classroom sometime and we're looking at our watch and we got maybe 5 minutes until the bell rings and you want to get some student feedback, right? So you get bold and you decide to ask your kids, let me hear what you think about the text we just read. And who's the first person to raise their hand? This student right here, the topic chainer, right? And you're thinking, okay, goodness, if I call on this person, we're going to be here for a while, right? So let me see how, what's your name, sir?
Terry.
Terry. So Terry's going to be my topic chainer. Can you raise your hand for a second, Terry? So Terry's my topic chainer. Keep your hand up, please, Terry. Terry raises his hand. It's about 5 minutes to go. I want to get some feedback from my student before we go, so I go around to the class. What's your name? Catrice answers the question. Good job, Catrice. She's a topic chainer. She'll give me a quick answer. Anybody else got any feedback they want to give me, right? I come over here. What's your name? Andrea, good job, Andrea. She's a topic chainer. Anybody else? Students, we need some feedback. I see a hand in the back here. Let me come back here. What's your name?
Imelda.
Imelda, good job, Imelda. She's a topic center, gave me 2 or 3 words. Anybody else got a hand up? I see one way in the corner back there. Let me go over there, right? We have this student. Thank you, Terry, appreciate it. What happens to Terry after a while? He gives up. Why does he give up? It's not important, right? I don't value him, so he gives up. Or what happens is he may give up, or he'll stand up, or he'll blurt out the answer, right? Because he says, you won't call on me, I'll call on myself, right? And what happens when he blurts out? What do we do more times than not? That's a problem. Your problem. But Terry said, I'm trying, because we know as topic chainers, we have them in our classroom. If we're honest, we know they'll start talking about one thing, we'll end up way out in left field, right? And sometimes topic chainers say things that tend to sort of spark an interest in other topic chainers, right? So you're trying to stay focused here. The idea becomes, I think we penalize these kids in school. Now, this is the problem. We want kids who are oftentimes here in their verbal responses. But here's the problem. When we ask kids to write, what do we want them to do? We ask them to make connections, right? Give us context, give us background, give us description, give us setting. So my argument is we have to have both of these types of approaches with regard to how students communicate, think, and write, okay? I tell my son, look, you got to start opening your mouth and talking and giving detail, because people will think you don't have much of a brain upstairs. I know you do, so you got to communicate better. I tell my daughter, sweetheart, I'm going to ask you a question. You got 15 seconds to answer the question. If you can't answer it then, we got a problem, right? So the issue is we cannot put students at a disadvantage. I think our girls get shortchanged here because more times than not, I would argue this is a more complex way of thinking. How do I connect all the pieces together to make a whole, right? And I say this is gender, I think it's more gender situated than anything else. There's a study that came out, I read this stuff all the time. On average, it showed that men speak per day 7,000 words. Uh-oh. 7,000 words a day for men. Should we just stop it right there? Do we want to go? Stop it right there. How many do you think women spoke on average a day? You just said, what'd you say? Somebody just said 21,000. 3 times as much as men did. I was like, wow, I thought that was kind of low, really, because I know my wife will keep me going. But that's good, though, because this is the reason why I think women live longer. Women express themselves more than men do. So we got to find a way to get our boys to talk. But here's the issue. When you ask young men to talk about sports and music, and guess what? They can talk, right? So the question is, how do we find something that engages them in the process, all right? Let me talk about this real quick, because reading is essential. We talked about reading. These are 5 things I know you all know, but I think we have to stress over and over again in our reading, okay? Because so many kids miss these points. Number 1, even if you teach at the 7th or 8th grade, I'm sorry to say, but you've got to find a way to stress phonemic awareness with your students, because many of them did not get it. I know you may say, I don't know how to teach that, I wasn't trained to do that, but guess what, folks? This is where a lot of our kids are lacking. I taught many years ago when there was this big debate between phonics and whole language in terms of which was the best approach. It was like a big gang war at the time. You know, which side are you on? Were you a whole language teacher or a phonics? I learned, me personally, I learned this way, right? Where you have to have a sound foundation on how you can make sound symbol relationships, right? You just have to have it. You've got to stress it to kids. They need to see it over and over and over again. If they don't have this, they're going to struggle forever with reading. Once you begin to develop the phonemic awareness and the phonics foundation, then you start to stress and work on fluency. Fluency, because what we have is that some kids get to the point where they can phonetically be sound, but it takes them so long to form the words that they can't be fluid. So sometimes we have students who read and it sounds real choppy, right? The, boy, and the girl. It takes them forever. They read every word accurately, but it takes them so long they don't know what they've read. So this is where you want to encourage them to have these time tests where you start to encourage them to build some fluency so that they can begin to make meaning out of what they've read. Then they can begin to identify words accurately and fluently. And sometimes it's just routine, having them read the same things over and over and over again. Even at 5th, 6th grade, they need to have success in those interactions, because once they have success, they're more willing to try out more challenging tasks when it comes to their reading. Once we have this, then we can move to how do we build robust and rich vocabulary, okay? Kids cannot build vocabulary if they don't have fluency and they don't have phonemic awareness. These all are connected and are sequentially organized. Then we can get to comprehension strategies. We make the mistake in schools oftentimes, we want them to have this, and they haven't even developed this yet. And we're wondering, how come they don't understand the text? Well, they can't understand what they can't read. We've been done study after study where we ask young people, okay, circle for us in this particular text the number of words that you could not spell. Almost half the words are circled. And then we wonder why they don't do well with the comprehension. So we've got to come back to the basics. I hate to say it, but it's just what we have to do. We have to help kids build a foundation first so that they know how to attack words. They have sound symbol recognition, right? And once they have success with that, then we move into fluency. Then you build vocabulary. Then you've got comprehension strategies that can become a part of the process. Has to be connected. Every teacher here, as much as we may think, I just want to get into some rich text. I get that. But guess what? You cannot get into rich text if kids don't have the most basic and most foundational aspect of how we read. This sound familiar to folks? We have to do it. You might say this is for the pre-K folks, the first grade folks. No, this is for all of us now. All of us have to be aware of this, all right? Now, I'm sorry this is so unclear. I thought I would give the power. So anything you want here, I'll be more than willing to share with you. I use this all. These are my cognitive sentence starters, because part of what I think we've got to get kids to do is to think as they read, think as they write. I use this all the time, right? So part of what we do is how do we start kids to think and write and speak in ways that allows them to sort of tap into what they already know. So I would have my students tap into prior knowledge. So when we start to read a text or after we read a text, I already know that what, and then they go from there. This story reminds me of, and we build from there. Or you have them make predictions. Kids love to make predictions based on what they think is going to happen. If they want to do that, build upon it, okay? So if a student wants to make predictions about something, I think that such and such and such is going to happen, right? So you start to make predictions. Or what you can have them do is visualize. As you hear this text, I can picture X, Y, and Z happening. Or in my mind, I see this particular character doing so and so and so, right? The idea being, how do we help kids make connections? This is another one. So when you read this text, this reminds me of what? So we want to find out, what do kids make the connection between as they read a particular text? Or they summarize. The key information in this text is fill in the blanks. In a nutshell, this says to me that, and you have them go, part of this is where, how do we get kids to think deeper? This is Bloom's taxonomy. We start and stop with knowledge and comprehension, but rarely do we move to analysis, rarely do we move to synthesis and evaluation, right? How about revise me? At first I thought this was going to happen, but now I see, and then they kind of expand from there. Or even if kids don't understand, how do we clarify? To understand better, I need to know more about and have them speak to us about what they're not getting. Sometimes, even though we have so much time and pressure placed on it, I think we don't do enough reteaching. We don't check for understanding enough. We just move on and move on and move on, assuming that all kids are with us. I'm on a one-man crusade, and I hope I don't step on too many toes by saying this. I'm on a one-man crusade to get rid of these pacing plans we have in schools. I think the pacing plans assume that all kids think and learn the same, right? You go into a school, all the fourth grade teachers need to be on the same page at the same day, at the same time. It doesn't work that way, folks, and kids don't think that way, and right, it's this lockstep fashion. Is that your district? I hope, I'm just gonna call it what I see it, right? I've told administrators, they've gotten upset with me, but look, who knows students better than us, folks who are in classrooms, right? You get written up, right? I think on some level, teachers have got to push back, because here's what happens. Students tell us this all the time, you know, we're going too fast. Young man told me that, you know what, we started teaching, the teacher taught a lesson, she started on Monday, she built on that from Tuesday to Wednesday, Thursday, they were tested on Friday. He said, I never understood what she talked about on Monday. So then how do we expect him to then test proficiently on Friday? So I think we've got to check for understanding frequently, and then go back and reteach again, just